The relationship between my brother and me had always been one that I held with great pride. From childhood, I admired him. He was always the person everyone leaned on, the one who took charge, who did everything right. He was my older brother, and I looked up to him in every sense. I remember the way people would praise him, his charm, his wisdom, his ability to make everything seem so easy. His kindness and sincerity radiated from him like warmth, and I thought he was perfect. Our family, on the outside, appeared to be a model of happiness. We were close-knit, always attending family gatherings, sharing dinners, and supporting each other through every challenge life threw at us. My brother was married to Emily, and their relationship seemed like something straight out of a love story. She was beautiful, kind, and devoted to him. Together, they built a life that many envied. They had their struggles, of course, as any couple would, but those struggles were always handled with maturity and respect. They complemented each other perfectly. I saw how much he loved her, how he would do anything for her. It was a love that everyone admired. I had never questioned their relationship. It seemed unshakable, and I wanted to believe that it always would be. But deep down, there were moments when I felt an unsettling distance growing between them, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, and I tried to ignore it. Over time, things began to change. I noticed small shifts in my brother's behavior. He was more distracted, his focus elsewhere. I thought maybe it was work. He had recently been promoted, and the new responsibilities seemed to weigh on him more than I had ever seen. He was always exhausted, always on the go, and I assumed that this was the cause of his change in demeanor. But then, something else caught my eye. I started noticing how, when Emily wasn't around, my brother would become distant, almost cold. His responses were shorter, his eyes less engaged. I thought it was odd, but I convinced myself that I was overthinking things. After all, he had always been the responsible, caring brother I had known. It felt impossible to imagine him being anything but that. One night, Emily confided in me over dinner. She seemed unusually quiet, her usual laughter absent. We had been talking about the typical family matters, but there was something in her tone, something in her hesitation that made me uncomfortable. She told me she felt like there was a distance between her and my brother. She had noticed changes in him too, but she didn't know how to address them. Emily's voice cracked when she spoke about how, despite being together, there seemed to be an emotional barrier between them. I had always considered my brother to be an open book, but now, hearing Emily speak, I realized I had never truly seen the cracks in their relationship. I tried to reassure her, to tell her it was probably a phase. But even as I spoke those words, I could feel a knot tighten in my stomach. The weight of what she had said lingered in the air, and I couldn't shake the thought that something was off. In the following days, my suspicions grew. I started observing my brother more closely. I noticed he had been spending more time away from home, his phone often face down, hidden away when he was around. There were times when his mood shifted abruptly, and he would retreat into silence, lost in thought. He became more absorbed in his work, even canceling plans with family and friends. It wasn't just the distance between him and Emily that bothered me. It was his withdrawal from everyone. The brother I once knew, the one who had always been present and engaged, was slipping away, and I couldn't figure out why. There were moments when he seemed like himself again, moments when his old warmth would resurface, and I felt a fleeting sense of hope. But those moments were fewer and farther between. And then, one afternoon, it happened. My brother's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He had stepped away to take a call, and I happened to glance at the screen. A name I didn't recognize appeared, and the message preview was short. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My heart skipped a beat. I quickly averted my eyes, but the words were seared into my mind. I felt an odd mixture of guilt and anger stir within me. It didn't take long for me to confirm what I already feared. A series of texts followed, each one more intimate than the last. There was no denying it anymore. I didn't know how to process what I had just seen. It felt like a betrayal of Emily, of our family, and of me. I couldn't fathom how my brother, the man I had always admired, could be capable of something like this. I had never thought of him as anything less than a moral compass. And yet, here was evidence of a secret life, a hidden affair that I hadn't even known to question. My mind raced with disbelief. I felt betrayed, not only by him but by myself for not seeing it sooner. But what hurt the most was the realization that I didn't know how to confront him. I wasn't ready to face the truth, not yet. The image I had of my brother, the person I had always trusted, was shattered. I could no longer view him through the same lens. The thought of confronting him felt like an impossible task. What would I say? How could I even begin to understand the reasons behind his actions? Was this really who he was all along, or had I been blind to his flaws? The truth was too painful to face, but deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The facade of perfection I had built around my brother was crumbling, and with it, everything I had once believed in. My admiration for him was replaced with a deep sense of confusion and betrayal. I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on, how much Emily had suffered without knowing, and how I, as his sibling, had been oblivious to the signs. But one thing was clear: things were never going to be the same again. I couldn't ignore the evidence any longer. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle came together. I couldn't shake the image of those texts from my brother's phone. The words on the screen played over and over in my mind, each one like a slap to my face. I felt sick to my stomach, torn between my loyalty to him and the truth of what I had seen. What was I supposed to do now? Should I confront him, or should I let this go? I couldn't let it go, not when everything I knew about him, everything I believed in, was falling apart in front of me. The more I processed the situation, the more questions piled up. How long had this been going on? Who was the other person? And why was he doing this? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. My brother, the one who had always been the perfect example of morality, was capable of betrayal. It didn't make sense. I tried to convince myself that I must have misinterpreted the situation, that there was an explanation for everything. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. I decided I couldn't sit on it any longer. I had to confront him. But how? What was I going to say? I couldn't even find the right words. Every part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I knew I needed to approach this with caution. The last thing I wanted was to make things worse, to destroy our relationship completely. Still, the thought of standing idly by while he deceived everyone around him felt impossible. The day of the confrontation came sooner than I expected. My brother was sitting in the living room, going through some paperwork, looking completely unaware of what was about to unfold. I took a deep breath before walking in. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands shaking with nerves. The silence between us felt heavier than usual, and I knew he could sense something was off. "Hey, we need to talk," I said, my voice unsteady. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the words, but they didn't come. I thought about the messages, about everything I had discovered. The weight of the truth felt unbearable. My gaze dropped to the floor, and I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Are you seeing someone else?" He froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. For a moment he said nothing. His face went pale, as if he had been caught off guard by my directness. But I knew. I could see the guilt in his eyes before he even opened his mouth. "Where is this coming from?" he asked, his voice shaky. He was trying to play it off, but there was no hiding the tension in his posture. "I saw the texts," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I saw everything." His face flushed, and he quickly stood up, running a hand through his hair. I didn't mean for you to find out this way." The weight of his words hit me like a punch. The man who had always been the strong, dependable figure in my life was now standing before me, caught in a lie he couldn't explain away. I wanted to scream, to let him know how hurt I was, how much his betrayal stung. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself composed. "Why?" was all I could manage to say. "Why would you do this?" He ran a hand over his face, avoiding my gaze. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't want to hurt Emily, and I didn't want to hurt you. It just happened. I don't know what went wrong, I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His words felt like empty excuses, attempts to explain away something that couldn't be explained. I had spent my whole life looking up to this man, and now, in one moment, all of it felt like a lie. "Don't you care about Emily?" I asked, the anger finally creeping into my voice. "How long has this been going on?" He winced, as if my words cut him deep. "I care about her more than anything. I never wanted to hurt her. But I don't know, things haven't been the same for a while. We've grown apart and I didn't know how to fix it. So I made a terrible decision. I was selfish. I didn't know what to say to that. There was no excuse for what he had done. There was no justification that would make it okay." I felt my stomach twist in disgust, and for a moment, I couldn't look at him. The man I had always thought was above reproach was now sitting in front of me, admitting to a betrayal that would destroy everything. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "This isn't just about you. You've hurt everyone around you. Emily, your friends, your family. Me. How could you be so careless?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I know, and I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this far. But I don't know how to fix it now. I don't know if it's even possible to fix it. I didn't know how to respond to that. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It all swirled inside me, making it hard to think clearly. The person I had trusted most in the world had broken that trust in the most unimaginable way. And now I didn't know how to move forward. Could I ever forgive him? Could I ever look at him the same way again? "I don't know what to say," I said quietly, my voice raw. "I don't know if I can even look at you the same way." He nodded, his face full of shame. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. Hell, I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was just lost." The silence between us was deafening. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that weighed heavily on my chest. I wasn't sure what to do next, how to proceed from here. But one thing was certain. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. My brother wasn't the man I thought he was. He was flawed just like everyone else. And now, the question was whether I could ever learn to accept that. I didn't know if I had it in me to face him again after that. The confrontation had left me drained, angry, and uncertain about everything I thought I knew. But avoiding him wasn't an option. We were family, and this situation, as much as I wanted to escape it, was something we had to face together. A part of me hoped he'd come to me first, ready to take responsibility, but days passed, and he stayed silent. That silence gnawed at me. It wasn't just his betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that he seemed unwilling to take the steps needed to fix what he'd broken. Finally, I decided to confront him again. This time I was calmer. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a resolve to understand. Even if I didn't want to, I needed answers. Not just for myself, but for Emily, for the rest of our family, for the image of the man I'd once believed him to be. When I asked him to sit down and talk, he didn't resist. He looked tired, worn down by guilt and the weight of his own actions. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in him that I hadn't before. It was strange. He had always been the strong one, the pillar of our family. Now he seemed smaller, almost lost. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked again, my voice quieter this time but no less firm. "Do you understand how much damage you've caused?" He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I think about it every day," he admitted. "I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt Emily, and I've hurt you. I don't know how to make it right. Why did you do it?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "You had everything. A wife who loves you. A family who looks up to you. What could possibly justify throwing that all away?" He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I didn't set out to hurt anyone," he said. "I didn't wake up one day and decide to betray Emily or to destroy the trust people have in me. It just happened. First, it was harmless. A conversation here, a text there. I didn't think it would go any further. But it did," I interrupted. "It did go further. And you knew what you were doing." He flinched but didn't argue. "You're right. I knew. And I hated myself for it. But I don't know. I felt disconnected. Emily and I haven't been in the same place emotionally for a long time. I felt invisible, like I was just going through the motions. And when someone came along who noticed me, who made me feel like I mattered again, I was weak. I gave in. I wanted to feel sympathy for him. I wanted to understand his perspective, but his words felt hollow. "Do you think that makes it okay?" I asked, my voice rising. "Do you think feeling neglected justifies betraying the person who trusted you the most?" "No," he said quickly. "I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's justified. I know I'm the one to blame. I know I should have talked to Emily about how I was feeling instead of doing what I did. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I was selfish." His honesty took me off guard. He wasn't trying to make excuses anymore. He was owning up to his mistakes, and while it didn't erase what he had done, it was something. Still, I couldn't let him off the hook that easily. "Do you even love her?" I asked after a long silence. "Emily, do you still love her?" His head snapped up, and for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. "Of course I do," he said, his voice breaking. "I never stopped loving her. That's the worst part of all this. I love her, but I didn't respect that love. I didn't protect it the way I should have. And now, I've ruined everything." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that his love for Emily was real, that it wasn't just a convenient excuse for his guilt. But trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. "Do you think she'll ever forgive you?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I wouldn't blame her if she didn't. She deserves better than what I've given her." For a moment, I saw my brother as he truly was. Flawed, broken, and deeply regretful. He wasn't the perfect man I had always believed him to be, but he wasn't a monster either. He was human, capable of mistakes as devastating as this one. It was a hard truth to accept, but it was the truth nonetheless. "So what now?" I asked. "What are you going to do to fix this?" He hesitated, as if he didn't have an answer. "I don't know if I can fix it," he admitted, "but I'm going to try. I'm going to tell Emily everything, no matter how much it hurts. She deserves the truth. And if she can't forgive me, then I'll have to live with that." His words hung heavy in the air. I didn't know if Emily would forgive him. I didn't even know if I could fully forgive him. But at least he was taking responsibility. At least he was trying to face the consequences of his actions. "I hope you mean that," I said finally. "Because if you don't, if you're not ready to do whatever it takes to make this right, then you don't deserve her or any of us." He nodded, his expression solemn. "I do mean it. I know I've let everyone down, but I want to do better. I need to do better." It wasn't the resolution I wanted. It wasn't a clean, happy ending. But it was a step. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The days that followed were heavy, filled with a tension that seemed impossible to escape. My brother had kept his word and confessed everything to Emily. I didn't ask for details, some things weren't mine to know, but the fallout was immediate. Emily was devastated. She left their home the same night, taking only a small bag with her. The rest of us found out the next morning when my mother called, her voice shaking as she told me Emily had come to stay with her for the time being. The family was thrown into chaos. Everyone had questions and no one had answers. My parents, who had always seen my brother as their golden child, were struggling to process what had happened. They called him constantly, desperate to understand why he had done what he did. But he didn't have anything new to say. He admitted his guilt, expressed his regret, and apologized repeatedly, but it didn't feel like enough. Not for Emily, not for my parents, and certainly not for me. In the weeks that followed, I watched my brother attempt to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. He reached out to Emily regularly, though she rarely responded. When she did, it was brief and formal, as if she were speaking to a stranger. She told him she needed space, and for once, he seemed to respect her wishes. He stopped trying to fix things immediately and instead focused on himself, which, ironically, was the one thing that gave me a sliver of hope. He started therapy, something I never thought I'd see him do. My brother, who had always prided himself on being in control, admitted he needed help. It was humbling to watch, and though I still harbored anger toward him, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride that he was at least trying to change. He began to talk openly about his feelings, about the reasons behind his actions. He didn't use them as excuses but rather as explanations for how he had lost his way. He admitted that he had been unhappy for years, though he hadn't realized it at the time. He had been so focused on maintaining the image of the perfect husband, the perfect brother, the perfect son, that he had ignored his own emotional needs. When someone else came along and made him feel seen, he was too weak to resist. It wasn't love, he said. It wasn't even about the other person. It was about filling a void he hadn't even realized was there. Hearing him talk like this was strange. It was as if I was meeting a new version of my brother. One who wasn't afraid to admit he was flawed. I didn't know what to do with this version of him. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to move forward, but another part of me couldn't let go of the betrayal. I wondered if I ever truly knew him, or if the man I had looked up to my entire life had always been a facade. Emily, on the other hand, was thriving in her own way. She had taken a leave of absence from work and spent her days focusing on herself. She started attending yoga classes, something she had always wanted to do but never had time for. She reconnected with old friends, spent time with family, and began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. I saw her a few times during this period, and though she was still clearly hurting, there was a strength in her that I hadn't seen before. She wasn't just surviving, she was growing. It was hard to watch her go through this, knowing my brother was the cause of her pain. I wanted to support her, to be there for her, but I also felt torn. She was family, but so was he. I didn't know how to balance the two. Every time I saw her, I felt a deep sense of guilt, as if I had somehow betrayed her by not cutting my brother out of my life completely. But how could I? He was my brother, and despite everything, I still loved him. Months passed, and slowly, the dust began to settle. Emily filed for a separation, though she stopped short of filing for divorce. She told my mother that she wasn't ready to make a final decision yet, that she needed more time to figure out what she wanted. My brother respected her decision, giving her the space she asked for. He didn't push, didn't try to force a reconciliation. He simply waited, focusing on his own growth in the meantime. I began to notice small changes in him. He was more present, more engaged with the people around him. He stopped burying himself in work and started spending more time with family. He even apologized to me, not just for what he had done to Emily but for the way he had let me down as a brother. He admitted that he had been so focused on his own problems that he had failed to see how his actions affected those who loved him. It wasn't an easy apology to accept. The hurt was still there, and I wasn't sure it would ever fully go away. But I saw sincerity in his eyes, a genuine desire to make things right. It didn't erase what he had done, but it was a start. As time went on, I found myself slowly letting go of the anger I had been holding on to. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a step in that direction. I realized that holding on to my resentment wasn't helping anyone. Not me, not Emily, and certainly not my brother. It was only keeping me trapped in the past, unable to move forward. The last time I saw Emily, she seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She told me she was still figuring things out, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She didn't know if she would ever be able to forgive my brother, but she was learning to forgive herself, for ignoring the signs, for staying silent, for not prioritizing her own happiness sooner. As for my brother, his journey was far from over. He was still working on himself, still trying to earn back the trust he had lost. Whether he and Emily would ever reconcile was a question no one could answer, not even them. But one thing was certain. They were both stronger now, not because of what had happened but in spite of it. And me? I was learning to see my brother not as the perfect man I had once believed him to be, but as a human being, flawed, broken, and trying his best to make amends. It wasn't the ending I had imagined for any of us. But maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe, in time, we would all find our way back to some version of peace.